Have you ever felt a chill brush your spine when the clock strikes midnight, as if the darkness itself is whispering your name? They say in this very village long ago, a man named Old Lee dared the night and paid the price. Lee was no ordinary farmer. He laughed at warnings, scoffed at lantern-light rituals, and believed the dead were best left in their graves. So when the ghost festival arrived, and neighbors huddled behind locked doors, he crept out under a waning moon toward the abandoned alley by the river. Lanterns dangled overhead, their red glow barely slicing through the fog, and a hush settled over the crooked rooftops. Drawing a slow breath, Lee cupped his hands around his mouth and called into the void, "If there's anyone out there, show yourself." "Come out." No echo answered, just the soft crackle of dry leaves at his feet. He waited, confident. Then came the laughter, faint, childlike, but hollow, drifting from somewhere behind a collapsed shrine. The sound sank into his bones. He took a step forward, lantern in hand, and the light wavered as though struggling against an unseen breath. His final words were lost beneath the laughter. When dawn broke, the alley stood empty. His footprints trailed in but never led away. His lantern lay overturned, unlit, and his neighbors found no trace of him except a single, folded piece of yellowed paper, etched with his name and nothing else. I tell you this not to frighten you, though it should. I tell you because every year when we mark the Ghost Festival, the boundary between our world and theirs grows perilously thin. It isn't a celebration of memories alone. It's a summons. Each flickering lantern, each whispered prayer, even the burning of paper effigies acts like a beacon in the dark, calling the forgotten spirits home. Imagine standing where Lee once stood, your heartbeat thrumming in your ears. You might convince yourself it's superstition. You might laugh like he did at overwrought traditions. But the midnight hour has a way of stripping away our certainty and leaving us wondering if it's really just the wind. There are those who claim Lee's disappearance was no accident. They say he crossed an unspoken line, that by mocking the spirits, he invited something darker than any restless ancestor. Since then, his story has become a warning woven into every lantern's flame. Respect the night, or risk being claimed by it. Tonight you may flick on your porch light and nod at the wind, thinking yourself safe, but ask yourself, when the lanterns glow and the mists roll in, will you dare to answer the midnight call? Will you lean into the hush? Press your ear to the darkness and whisper back, because once you do, there's no telling who or what might step forward. And unlike Old Lee, you might never find your way home. They say the Ghost Festival wasn't born from merriment or nostalgia, but from a pact older than any empire. In the earliest accounts, etched on bamboo slips and whispered by Taoist sages, this was no mere holiday, but a solemn negotiation between the living and the dead. As the Book of Rites records, on the eve of the 7th moon, villagers set forth bowls of boiled millet at each threshold, that wandering shades might be fed and turned from mischief. That simple line hides a universe of meaning. The millet was not an offering of charity so much as a binding contract, a way to say, "We remember you. Now do not remember us with vengeance." Long before lanterns draped city streets in shimmering red bands, the festival grew from agrarian rites in a landscape where rice, paddies met misty hills. Farmers believed the dead walked in the furrows beside them, their spirits hungry for the essentials of life, grains, warmth, human presence. To feed a hungry ghost was to prevent it from feeding on your unborn children, your unprotected home, your unspoken fears. As Hermetic philosophers later pointed out, life and death were never separate kingdoms, but two hemispheres of the same sphere. When the spirit world was honored, the material world flourished. When it was ignored, calamity followed. Across rivers and mountain passes, pockets of Taoist mystics and Buddhist monks wove their own threads into this tapestry. Some monks wrote journals of rituals that opened doors between realms, granting temporary sight of ancestral hosts. Others warned of darker consequences, that every invitation carried its own guest, and that certain shades, angry, lost, or just plain curious, could slip the leash. Over centuries, these cautions dissolved into folklore, a grandmother's bedtime tale to keep children indoors, or a whispered warning to farmhands to finish the harvest before the seventh moon. Yet by the age of dynasties and court intrigue, the festival's true purpose had become an embarrassment to emperors keen on order. Why placate wandering souls when you could simply suppress their stories? Edicts were issued against midnight rites, texts were burned, and those caught practicing the old rituals were fined, or worse, branded as superstitious troublemakers. The millet bowls gave way to incense sticks. The solemn negotiation was repackaged as spectacle. The philosopher Lu Xun lamented in his diaries that his grandmother's careful offerings had been reduced to perfunctory incense at temple gates, an echo of remembrance stripped of its power. Colonialism and modernization hammered another wedge between past and present. Missionaries dismissed the ghost festival as pagan folly, while merchants seized on its lantern imagery to sell paper crafts and neon lights. Today you see more tourists than bloodlines on the riverbanks, photographing painted dragons, but never understanding why some older villagers still refuse to cross certain bridges at dusk. The negotiation has flipped. The living now pay for ghost-themed souvenirs, and the spirits, if they come at all, are drowned out by the hum of scooters and pop music. But in occult circles, where seekers still chase the hidden currents of theosophy and hermetic lore, the festival's original power remains a sacred secret. They speak of mid-yang energy, a time when yin currents swell and the veil thins by cosmic design. In that slender window, they say, you can glimpse your future self, negotiate with your own shadow, and repair karmic debts with ancestors who still whisper through the pines. That's why even today, those who remember the old ways prepare themselves with talismans, salt lines, and silent prayers. Not for show, but to stand firm in the face of forces that expect an audience. Philosophically, the Ghost Festival's origins remind us that boundaries between life and death, self and other, are simultaneously fragile and essential. By acknowledging the unseen, we acknowledge our own impermanence and responsibility. By feeding the ghosts, we feed our own capacity for empathy and remembrance. Yet modern culture's forgetfulness has left us with brittle psyches. We mourn with hashtags but never sit with the real grief. We light emojis but never pause for true reflection. These buried secrets have been misinterpreted as quaint traditions, marketed as exotica, or scorned as backward superstition. But they endure in the undercurrents of collective memory, waiting for those brave enough to unearth them. Soon we'll peel back another layer, exploring the forbidden rites and unspoken rules, still whispered in hushed tones by elders who refuse to let the old knowledge slip into oblivion. So when the seventh moon rises this year, and lanterns sway like pale moons of paper, remember that you're not merely lighting a path through the dark. You're stepping into an ancient council. Will you approach with respect, offer what is due, and listen for the quiet rumble of gratitude? Or will you, like the emperors and merchants before you, turn away and let the pact dissolve into smoke? The choice, as always, is yours. They say the most dangerous ritual isn't the one you perform at midnight, but the one you break in the dark, long before the lanterns ever glow. For generations, elders whispered of unspoken rules, rituals so simple you'd hardly notice them, yet so vital that a single misstep could tear open the veil between worlds. These weren't etched in holy books or proclaimed from temple rooftops. They were scribbled on the margins of lived experience, passed from grandmother to granddaughter, across the flicker of a dying hearth. My own grandmother had a story she told more than once, always in a hush. On a chill autumn evening, just after the sun gave up its warmth, she swept her courtyard floor for the day's last time. She tucked the broom into a corner, its straw bristles still quivering under her careful hand. Hours later, in the dead of night, she woke to a soft crunch underfoot. footsteps crossing the courtyard toward her bedroom door. She froze, breath held tight, heart pounding like a war drum. At first she thought it must be one of the grandkids playing a prank. But when she dared to peek through the shutters, she saw nothing but moonlit stones and the faint outline of her broom, now resting halfway across the yard. No one had moved it, and yet the footprints led unmistakably back to where it once stood. She never said what she did next, only that she dropped to her knees and whispered an apology to whoever or whatever she had disturbed. By dawn, the broom was returned to its corner, and the footprints had vanished into the mist. From that night on, she swept before sunset and never again dared approach that courtyard in darkness. Her story isn't an isolated scare tactic. It's a prism through which the essence of these forbidden rituals comes into focus. Consider the broom itself, a tool of order, meant to chase away refuse and uncertainty. But after dusk, in the world of spirits, it becomes a blade that severs the delicate threads tying restless souls to their earthly needs. In sweeping the ground, she inadvertently cleared a path, one the unseen were all too willing to walk. Just as a mirror can reflect more than your own face when tilted against the candlelight, everyday actions hold hidden power when performed in the wrong context. Imagine burning paper offerings as an invitation rather than a farewell. Imagine spilling salt by accident and unknowingly, drawing a protective circle too small for your own fear. These taboos are not arbitrary. They were crystallized from centuries of observation, as villagers noted which missteps became nightmares. But here's the paradox. The more you cling to these rules as rigid laws, the less you understand their true purpose. They are less about control and more about respect. It's like learning to read the wind on a seashore. You don't command the breeze. You only learn where to stand so you're not knocked off your feet. Similarly, knowing not to whistle beneath the eaves isn't superstition. It's acknowledgement that certain frequencies can attract more than moths to a flame. The old warnings trained us to listen, to feel the invisible currents swirling just beyond the glow of our lanterns. Yet modern life has swept away so many of these customs, leaving us vulnerable in ways we can barely perceive. We leave doors ajar at night, whistle through empty halls and ignore the bowl of millet on the altar, if we even have an altar at all. And when something goes wrong, an unexplained chill in the spine, a sudden shadow flicker across the corner of your eye, we chalk it up to fatigue or imagination. We forget that once upon a time, every breath we drew under the moon was a silent conversation with the beyond. Across Asia, you'll still find households that observe the old taboos with unwavering devotion. They light incense at precise moments, never cut hair on Ghost Festival Eve, and absolutely refuse to swim in rivers after dark. To them, these are not quaint traditions, but vital lifelines. I spoke with a fisherman who insisted that one year, a careless stroke of his scythe at dusk severed an unseen thread, so that his nets tore and his boat sprang leaks, as if jilted spirits took revenge. Whether you believe his tale or not, he lost more than fish that season. He lost his confidence in separating the material from the spiritual. It's tempting to dismiss these stories as folklore, but consider how they functioned as early forms of risk management. In a world before streetlights and door locks, knowing to finish work before dark wasn't just practical, it was survival. Every taboo was a reminder that unseen forces roamed the earth, forces that could help or harm depending on the respect shown. The grandmother's midnight footprints are a metaphor for consequence. What we sweep away in unawareness may return when we're least prepared. And yet the most unsettling aspect of these forbidden rituals is how easily they slip into oblivion. A generation dismisses them as superstition, a festival becomes a tourist attraction, and suddenly nobody remembers why the embers of those ritual fires burned so hot in the first place. So I ask you, have you ever found yourself whistling at twilight or tossing a broom aside without a thought? Have you ever ignored the small bowl of rice you left for someone you couldn't see? The answers lie not in ancient scrolls alone, but in your own hesitation, your instinctive flinch at a sudden chill. Because these taboos aren't hurdles to clear. Their guardians at the threshold, warning you that crossing without care can awaken more than just memories. And the most critical lesson? Not every rule is meant to be broken, especially those whispered under candlelight and passed along by trembling hands. In the next chapter, we'll explore how fear, often dismissed as superstition, can actually be the key to preserving the boundaries that protect us all. But for now, take a moment to reflect. Which of these forbidden rituals have you already unwittingly broken? And what footprints might be heading toward your door tonight? Fear is often cast as our enemy, something to conquer, to outgrow, or to medicate away. Yet the Ghost Festival reminds us that fear, when honored rather than shunned, can become our greatest guardian. Centuries ago, communities learned to weave fear into the very fabric of their traditions, erecting invisible fences that protected the living from the restless dead and safeguarded fragile social harmony. In this sense, fear wasn't a weakness to overcome, but a signal to heed, an ancestral alarm system tuned to the subtlest shifts in the veil between worlds. Psychologist Jonathan Haidt argues in his Moral Foundations theory that certain emotions, especially disgust and fear, serve key social functions by enforcing boundaries that keep groups cohesive and safe. In one striking example, Haidt discusses how taboos around purity in many cultures aren't arbitrary superstitions, but communal bulwarks against real threats, spoiled food, disease, or the breakdown of social order. When fear-based rules are respected, they channel our anxieties into rituals and guidelines that reinforce trust and cooperation. In the case of the Ghost Festival, those anxieties are turned outward, toward spirits whose hunger and grief could manifest as misfortune if not appeased. By offering food, paper money, and lantern light, entire villages participated in a collective act of boundary maintenance, turning fear into a shared language of respect. Yet modern sensibilities often mistake these rules for mere relics of ignorance. We chuckle at incense offerings and mock lantern taboos without recognizing that every ritual was born from hard-earned observation. Take, for example, the old belief that cutting one's hair during Ghost Month would cut one's luck with ancestral spirits. To us it sounds quaint, but it's grounded in an ancient truth. Hair was once used in binding spells and communication rites. Trimming it at a time when the air was thick with unseen presence risked sending mixed signals, soothing one spirit while vexing another. The ritual wasn't about vanity. It was a semaphore to the shadow world, signaling that you welcomed some guests but not others. Another overlooked detail is the precise timing of these taboos. In some regions, you couldn't sweep your home after dark, not because sweeping was inherently dangerous, but because the act stirred up unseen dust and ash that, in legend, carried whispers from the other side. If those whispers were carried into your living quarters, they could seed nightmares or awaken dormant fears. The bewildering array of taboos, no swimming, no whistling, no midnight meals, maps directly onto the thresholds most likely to be crossed by wandering shades. In essence, the rules carve out a temporal and spatial boundary, telling spirits where the living world ends and the dead world begins. Contradictions arise, of course. Fear by its nature can paralyze as well as protect. Some families became so obsessed with taboos that they lost the festival's deeper meaning, viewing it as a minefield of prohibitions rather than a sacred negotiation. In the 19th century, travelers to Southeast Asia recorded entire communities refusing to light their hearths for fear the smoke would guide malevolent ghosts inside. Kitchens fell cold, children shivered, and everyday life stalled, all because the communal fear had ossified into a suffocating rigidity. The festival's original purpose, to balance remembrance with renewal, was lost when fear eclipsed respect, showing us the fine line between healthy caution and debilitating terror. Hidden within this tension lies a profound lesson. Boundaries are only useful when they're flexible enough to evolve. In some Taoist circles, The ghost festival's rites were adapted into healing ceremonies, where fear was transmuted into compassionate communion. Monks would chant names of the departed, transforming fear into empathy, and in doing so dissolve the boundary that trapped spirits in anguish. This alchemical approach reminds us that fear need not be an endpoint but a doorway, if we're brave enough to step through, with understanding rather than dread. Here's a little-known bit of trivia that illustrates the festival's depth. In parts of rural Vietnam, families still perform a ritual called Cho Ma, or ghost market, where they set up miniature stalls of food and paper goods on the village outskirts. Visiting spirits are invited to shop freely, and children are taught that generosity toward the unseen builds a kind of spiritual credit. The next morning, the offerings are burned in a single roaring bonfire, an offering and a release. Observers who pass by days later report finding tiny charred effigies arranged neatly around the old hearth, as if the ghosts had left behind thank-you notes. This market isn't recorded in imperial archives or faded Buddhist sutras. It survives only in oral memory, a testament to the festival's ever-shifting borderlands. Philosophically, the Ghost Festival confronts us with an uncomfortable truth. We inhabit liminal spaces all the time. Between wakefulness and sleep, speech and silence, guilt and forgiveness, our lives are defined by thresholds. Fear signals their presence, nagging us that a step too far could unbalance the world. Rather than ignoring that signal, or worse, mocking it, the ancients taught us to weave it into our celebrations, to let it guide our actions without enslaving our hearts. Of course, our modern world has little room for such tender negotiations. We erect steel and concrete barriers instead of rice paper screens, replace ritual fires with neon signs, and soothe fear with pharmaceuticals rather than ceremony. Yet whenever a disaster strikes, a sudden storm, an epidemic, we instinctively revert to old patterns. Mass gatherings for prayer, candlelight vigils, moments of silence. We rediscover that fear, expressed collectively, can tether us to shared purpose and mutual care. In that fleeting return to ritual, we glimpse the Ghost Festival's ancient wisdom. Fear is not the enemy of community, but its ally in cultivating respect for the unknown. As we prepare to explore first-hand accounts of spirits threading through our world, remember this: the taboos and the terror were never ends in themselves. They were scaffolding for something more profound, a remembrance that life and death are partners in a dance, not adversaries in a war. Fear marked the perimeter, but respect opened the gate, and in that space between, the trembling hush before the lanterns are lit, we find the true invitation. So ask yourself, in what areas of your own life have you forgotten the protective power of fear? Where might an old boundary, once maintained by ritual or warning, save you from crossing into consequences you cannot undo? Up next, we'll step closer to that boundary and feel its pulse in stories of spirits walking among us, because sometimes the veil slips without warning, and only those who respect the alarm know how to navigate the dark. Have you ever felt the air grow dense, as if every breath carried a weight beyond your lungs? That's the Ghost Festival's true moment, when the veil between worlds thins so finely you could slip through without even knowing. I once sat beside Elder Mei, her weathered face lit by the tremble of lantern light, and watched as she stared off into the darkness beyond our camera's frame. Her voice was soft, but every word carried the gravity of centuries. "On this night," she said, "the line between the living and the dead is paper thin. You could whisper a secret, and the spirits would hear you as clearly as I do." Elder Mei grew up in a village carved into mist-shrouded hills, where every household kept an altar of simple clay bowls and hand-folded paper offerings. She recalled her first ghost festival at the age of 6, when she and her grandmother tiptoed through candlelit lanes to lay out rice and tea for invisible guests. "I thought I was too young to understand," May admitted, her eyes reflecting the lantern's flicker. "But I felt a presence, gentle, expectant, like I was welcome there." That childlike openness stayed with her, shaping a life devoted to bridging worlds rather than ignoring them. This is more than folklore. Modern psychology tells us that our minds crave meaning in liminal moments, the thresholds between one state and another, because they force us to confront uncertainty. When we recognize that fear isn't our enemy but a guidepost, our awareness sharpens. Suddenly, the rustle of tree leaves or the distant clink of bamboo poles becomes part of a larger conversation. The world feels alive, interconnected, woven with threads we usually overlook. Imagine walking home tonight and pausing at the corner where you once saw a shadow dart across the wall. Instead of dismissing it as your tired eyes playing tricks, you might nod to yourself, recalling Mei's words about the paper-thin veil. You'd breathe deeply, ground yourself in the present, and mentally offer a word of respect. No grand ceremony needed, just a silent acknowledgement that this neighborhood too holds more stories than your daytime commute reveals. But there are pitfalls. The first misconception is that fear must be stoked to keep these boundaries intact. Some believe that by scaring themselves silly, watching horror films, reenacting ghost stories, they build resilience. In truth, manufacturing terror only clouds perception. It desensitizes you to the subtle signals and breeds recklessness. Elder Mei warns against seeking the supernatural like a thrill seeker. When you chase ghosts, she told me, you're turning a sacred practice into spectacle. You lose the reverence that protects you. Another trap is the assumption that rituals must be elaborate to be effective. Grand temples and incense towers look impressive on social media, but they can also become hollow performances. The old wisdom never insisted on grandeur. It valued sincerity. If you choose to light a single candle by your window or place a small cup of tea on your desk at the festival's peak, do it with intention. Speak your own words, however simple. I see you, I remember you. That whispered phrase carries more weight than 100 hollow chants. Elder Mei taught me a small practice she calls the quiet greeting. At the festival's climax, when lanterns shine brightest, she steps outside, cups her hands around a plain clay bowl of water, and murmurs an invitation. Come rest here if you need. Then she waits motionless for a heartbeat or two. If a breeze stirs or a lantern flame wavers, she offers a silent bow of gratitude. This exchange takes less than 30 seconds, yet it anchors her in a lineage of caretakers who honored the unseen without fear. Integrating this awareness into daily life doesn't require a weekly festival. You can borrow the principle of the quiet greeting to transform everyday anxieties. Before a big meeting, think of the ancestors who negotiated peace on misty riverbanks. Offer them a silent nod. When you feel overwhelmed by news of distant tragedies, imagine a paper offering drifting skyward, carrying your intentions for healing. These small gestures remind the mind that we are part of a continuum, a lineage of fear, respect, and hope that stretches beyond the confines of our single lifetimes. None of this guarantees flawless protection. Elder Mei herself laughs at the notion of a perfect ritual. Even I forget sometimes, she confessed, recalling a season when she neglected her altar and suffered a string of bad luck. A wilted crop, a cracked teacup, a feverish night. It wasn't punishment. It was a reminder that balance demands attention. She returned to her practice with humility, and the world settled once more. As you carry these insights forward, be guided by curiosity more than dread. Notice the small frissons of recognition when you pause at dusk, the sudden hush in your thoughts before sleep. Treat them as invitations, not alarms, and remember Elder Mei's gaze, steady as the lantern she held. Respect, she taught me, is the bridge that shelters us when spirits roam freely. In our next chapter, we'll explore personal encounters, stories of wanderers, scholars, and skeptics who claim to feel a spirit's brush against their shoulder or heard a voice calling their true name. Until then, practice your quiet greeting and see how the world around you begins to shimmer with possibilities you never knew you were missing. By the time you've laid out your simple offerings and whispered your quiet greeting, something remarkable begins to shift. The Ghost Festival's ancient wisdom reveals that life's most profound lessons come not from avoiding fear, but from facing it and letting it guide you toward respect, remembrance, and renewed purpose. This festival isn't just about placating wandering spirits. It's a mirror held up to our own edges, the places where we feel most uncertain, most alive. When you honor a boundary, whether that means ending a destructive habit, mending a fractured relationship, or simply pausing to recognize unseen forces, you are weaving a line of protection and possibility. The ancestors taught this through millet bowls and paper lanterns, through whispered taboos and midnight vigils, but the essence remains the same. Boundaries are gifts, not prisons. They teach us where to stand, how to move, and when to bow our heads in humility. In today's world, we erect walls of steel and glass to keep out dangers we can see, yet we neglect the subtle fences that guard our hearts and minds. Social media scrolls away our deepest reflections. Fluorescent lights banish the hush of dusk. Convenience lulls us into forgetting the power of a single intention-filled moment. But every year, when communities still light lanterns and offer rice to unseen guests, they remind us that the true safety we seek begins inside, anchored in the courage to encounter what lies beyond our comfort zone. I'll never forget the first time I tried the lantern ritual on my own. I was 19, restless with questions I couldn't name, haunted by a childhood fear of being forgotten. Holding a small paper lantern at the river's edge, I took a deep breath and called out, "If anyone is listening, show me the way." For a long moment, nothing happened. Then a soft breeze stirred the lantern's flame, and I felt a gentle tug at my chest, as if someone was guiding me rather than judging me. In that instant, my old fear of insignificance untangled itself. I realized I was part of something far larger than my own anxieties. The boundary I had feared to cross, between loneliness and belonging, doubt and faith, fell away, and in its place a new clarity took root. That awakening taught me that crossing lines isn't inherently reckless. It becomes dangerous only when we do so, without preparation or respect. The Ghost Festival's rituals, then, are more than superstitions. Their practice runs for our own inner transformations. Each taboo we honor or transgress, each candle we light or snuff out, teaches us how to navigate the liminal spaces of our lives, those moments when the old world dissolves and the new one hasn't yet formed. So I invite you now to consider your own edges. What boundaries have you avoided because they felt too daunting? What fears have you kept locked away, convinced that touching them would unleash chaos? The festival shows us that acknowledgement is the first step toward mastery. By offering a word of respect to the unknown, you chart a course toward understanding and peace. If this journey has stirred something in you, please share your experience. What personal ritual might you create to honor your unseen allies? How will you mark the next time your veil feels too thin? When doubt, grief, or wonder brushes your spirit? Leave a comment below. Light your own lantern in the night and join the conversation. Your insights could be the guiding flame someone else needs. As lanterns drift silently into the sky, carrying our hopes and hesitations, remember that every spark matters. The Ghost Festival teaches us that boundaries, when held with intention, become bridges to fresh beginnings. We walk alongside ancestors and ideas older than any one of us, yet intimately connected to our everyday struggles. The final question isn't whether you'll cross the line, it's what you'll discover when you do. What boundary are you ready to respect or ready to cross?